There's a prison most intelligent people never escape, and the cruelest part is that they built it themselves. You've felt it, haven't you? That suffocating sense of being surrounded by people who don't see what you see, who don't question what you question, who move through life on autopilot while you're screaming inside at the absurdity of it all. But here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to admit. Your intelligence isn't setting you free. It's locking you in chains. Let me paint you a picture of a paradox that has haunted humanity for centuries. The smartest person in the room is often the loneliest, the most frustrated, the most powerless. While those around them dance in comfortable ignorance, they stand paralyzed by the weight of awareness. They see the flaws in every system, the lies behind every smile, the manipulation in every advertisement, the decay beneath society's polished surface. And what does this awareness bring them? Not power, not influence, just isolation. The ancient Greeks had a word for this: aletheia, the state of not being hidden, of seeing truth unveiled. Plato warned us about this in his allegory of the cave. The philosopher who escapes the cave and sees the sun, who understands reality as it truly is, cannot simply return and convince the prisoners that their shadows are illusions. They mock him, they reject him, they might even kill him for suggesting their comfortable reality is a lie. Intelligence, without the ability to communicate it, without the social infrastructure to implement it, becomes nothing more than a beautiful prison cell with a view of freedom you can never reach. Think about it deeply for a moment. In a world where the loudest voice wins, where emotional manipulation trumps logical argument, where viral stupidity spreads faster than careful reasoning, what good is your brilliant mind? You can see the forest while everyone else argues about individual trees, but if nobody listens, if nobody cares, if the systems reward conformity over innovation and comfort over truth, then your intelligence becomes your curse. You're Cassandra, blessed with prophecy but cursed so no one believes you. You're the canary in the coal mine, singing warnings that fall on deaf ears because the miners are too busy digging to notice they're suffocating. The psychologist Dunning-Kruger showed us something devastating. Those with the least competence often have the most confidence, while those with the most competence doubt themselves relentlessly. So while fools charge forward with absolute certainty, you hesitate, you analyze, you see 17 different perspectives and 18 possible outcomes. By the time you've carefully considered your position, the fools have already made their decision, rallied their troops, and seized power. Intelligence makes you cautious, stupidity makes you bold, and in the game of social dominance, boldness almost always wins. But here's the question that should terrify you. If smart people are powerless in a society of fools, doesn't that mean the fools designed the system? And if the fools designed the system, what does that say about who really holds the power? I know you've experienced this countless times. You're in a meeting, and someone proposes an idea that's objectively terrible, that ignores basic logic, that will clearly fail, but everyone nods enthusiastically. You speak up, present the facts, explain the flaws, and suddenly you're the problem. You're negative, you're not a team player, you're overthinking it. The idea moves forward. It fails exactly as you predicted, and somehow you're still not vindicated. Instead, they blame external factors, bad luck, anything but the fundamental stupidity of the decision. Or maybe it's in your personal life. You watch people you care about make the same mistakes over and over, caught in cycles of self-destruction that are painfully obvious to you, but invisible to them. You try to help, to guide, to illuminate, and they smile politely and continue walking toward the cliff. You watch relationships crumble over problems that could be solved with a single, honest conversation. You see people chasing happiness in all the wrong places, worshipping false idols of success, drowning in consumer culture and social media validation. And when you suggest there might be a better way, they look at you like you're speaking a foreign language. The worst part isn't that they don't understand, It's that they don't want to understand, because understanding would require change, and change is uncomfortable. It's easier to stay in the cave than to climb toward the sun. It's easier to follow the herd than to think independently. It's easier to consume than to create, to react than to reflect, to accept than to question. You've probably felt the temptation to just give up, to dumb yourself down, to stop caring so deeply about truth and meaning and progress. Maybe you've even tried it, tried to just go with the flow, to nod along, to stop fighting battles you can never win. And for a moment, it felt like relief, but then the hollowness set in, didn't it? Because you can't unsee what you've seen, you can't unknow what you know. Your consciousness is a one-way door, and there's no going back to blissful ignorance. If this idea is already resonating with you, if you're feeling seen in a way you haven't felt in a long time, then stay with me. Subscribe to this journey, because what comes next will change the way you see your intelligence forever. This isn't just about diagnosing the problem, it's about discovering a path forward that most people never find. Now let me show you where everyone gets this wrong, including you. The powerlessness you feel isn't actually about your intelligence versus their stupidity. It's about playing a game you were never designed to win. You're trying to use a hammer to fix a problem that requires a paintbrush, and then feeling frustrated when the hammer doesn't work. The philosopher Nietzsche understood this perfectly. He talked about slave morality versus master morality, and while those terms sound harsh, the concept is profound. Most smart people operate from what he called slave morality. They believe the system should reward merit, logic, fairness, truth. They believe that if they're right, if they work hard, if they follow the rules, eventually the world will recognize their value. They wait for permission, for validation, for the system to change and finally see them. But here's the revelation that will set you free. The fools aren't powerless because they're stupid. They're powerful because they understand something you don't. They understand that power isn't granted by being right. Power is taken by being influential. They don't wait for the world to make sense. They shape the world to fit their narrative. They don't argue with logic. They win with emotion, with storytelling, with tribal belonging, with simple messages that resonate rather than complex truths that confuse. Think about every leader, every influencer, every person who's ever moved masses. Were they always the smartest person in the room? Rarely. But they were the best at making people feel something. They were the best at creating movements, at building tribes, at telling stories that made people believe. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't end segregation with complex policy papers. He did it with a dream. Steve Jobs didn't revolutionize technology with engineering specifications. He did it with a vision of think different. The most powerful people in history weren't necessarily the most intelligent. They were the most compelling. So here's your first tool for transformation. Stop trying to be right and start learning to be resonant. Your intelligence is valuable, but only when it's packaged in a way people can receive it. You need to become fluent in the language of emotion while maintaining your grasp of logic. You need to tell stories that carry truth rather than lectures that impose it. You need to build bridges instead of walls, even when you're frustrated by the gap between where people are and where you know they could be. Your second tool is understanding leverage. Archimedes said, "Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world." Smart people try to push the world directly with their ideas. Wise people find the leverage points where small actions create massive change. Instead of fighting every battle, pick the battles that matter. Instead of trying to change everyone, focus on the few who are ready to change and let them become your multipliers. Instead of arguing with fools, create systems that make foolishness irrelevant. Your third tool is the art of strategic patience. The Stoics called this amor fati, the love of fate. Smart people become bitter because they expect immediate results. They see the right answer and can't understand why the world doesn't immediately adopt it. But systems change slowly. Societies evolve gradually. Ideas need time to germinate. The people who change the world are those who plant seeds knowing they might not see the harvest, who fight battles knowing they might not see the victory, who speak truth knowing it might take generations to be heard. But there's a secret still deeper than all of this, something that most people never discover because it requires surrendering the very thing that makes you feel special. Here's the revelation that will either liberate you or devastate you, depending on whether you're ready to hear it. Your intelligence isn't what makes you powerless. Your ego about your intelligence is what makes you powerless. Stay with me because this cuts deep. The reason you feel powerless in a society of fools isn't because you're surrounded by fools. It's because you need them to be fools to maintain your identity as the intelligent one. Your suffering comes from attachment to being right, to being smarter, to being the one who sees what others don't. You've built your entire sense of self around your intelligence, and so you need the world to stay stupid to validate who you think you are. The Buddha taught that suffering comes from attachment, and you're attached to being the smartest person in the cave. You're attached to your frustration, because your frustration proves you're different, special, enlightened. But what if you let that go? What if your intelligence didn't need to prove itself against anyone's stupidity? What if you could be brilliant without needing others to be foolish? The moment you stop needing to be right, you become truly powerful. Because now you're free to use any strategy that works. You can speak simply without feeling like you're betraying your intelligence. You can meet people where they are without feeling superior or resentful. You can influence without dominating, teach without preaching, lead without needing followers to validate your leadership. The greatest paradox of intelligence is this: the smarter you become about facts and logic, the dumber you often become about people and power. Real intelligence isn't just knowing things, it's knowing how to make things happen in the world as it actually exists, not as you wish it existed. It's having the wisdom to know when to speak and when to stay silent, when to fight and when to flow, when to lead and when to follow. So here's where we land, and I want you to really let this sink in. You're not powerless because you're smart in a world of fools. You're powerless because you've been playing the wrong game with the wrong rules. The game isn't who's right. The game is who creates change. And creating change requires intelligence, yes, but it also requires influence, emotional wisdom, strategic patience, and the humility to meet people in their reality, rather than demanding they rise to yours. Your intelligence is a gift, but like any gift, it's useless if you don't know how to use it. The cave doesn't need another philosopher shouting about the sun. It needs someone wise enough to light candles in the darkness, patient enough to guide one person at a time toward the exit, and humble enough to know that some will never leave, and that's okay too. The society of fools you despise, it's your training ground. Every fool is teaching you patience. Every failed argument is teaching you communication. Every moment of powerlessness is teaching you where real power actually lives. Not in being right, but in being effective. Not in standing apart, but in building bridges. Not in your intelligence alone, but in your intelligence combined with wisdom, compassion, and strategic action. You've been given the gift of sight in a world that prefers blindness. Don't waste it on bitterness and isolation. Use it to light fires that others can gather around. Use it to build systems that make wisdom accessible. Use it to become the kind of person who changes minds not by force, but by inspiration. If this message resonated with you, if something shifted inside as you listened, then do me a favor. Hit that like button because it tells me to keep creating content that challenges you to grow. Leave a comment sharing your biggest insight from this video because your perspective matters and this community learns from each other. And subscribe because this is just the beginning of a journey toward reclaiming your power in a world that desperately needs your intelligence, but only if you learn to wield it with wisdom. Share this with someone who's frustrated by the world's stupidity, someone who's brilliant but feels powerless, someone who needs to hear that their intelligence isn't the problem. The solution is learning to use it differently. The revolution isn't about making everyone smarter. It's about making smart people effective, and that journey starts now.